Hey everybody, it's Dan Sphere at www.theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Today's post, although I'm not an expert on clinical trials being done overseas, it is a big issue and it's an issue that is gaining a lot of coverage lately. And just going to talk a little bit about that. I know this blog is aimed at study participants, and some of our study participants, may be overseas. Not all of them are here in the United States. So we have some, in Europe. I know I've been interacting with a few from Argentina, um, South America. This is an important topic, and I'm going to have guest gurus come on, and Don and myself are going to be interviewing them, and they certainly have a lot more experience in the subject of clinical trials being conducted overseas, and especially with particular importance being given to clinical trials being done in developing nations. Nations like India, China, some of the poorer countries where, you know, maybe there are good clinical trial sites out there, and then there's also some bad ones that may take advantage of the economically disadvantaged. So these are important issues, and I'm definitely going to have. I'm talking, behind the scenes. We're dealing with a lot of people who have agreed to come on our show and be interviewed, and those are going to be excellent, um, excellent interviews and excellent shows, and we can't wait to bring you them. But today, I just wanted to kind of introduce the topic to you guys. So, as there's clinical trials that are done here, and then there's clinical trials that are done overseas. And lately, there's been a huge growing trend of the drug companies basically outsourcing the clinical trials to developing nations, particularly India and China. And it's pretty much because of the economy, and it's a lot cheaper. It's about 10 times cheaper to do a study in developing nation than it is to do it here. Now, the FDA still is in charge of regulating those trials being done there if the drug is to be approved in the United States. The FDA does regulate trials being done anywhere. However, people make the argument that the FDA is not big enough and doesn't have a big enough infrastructure to adequately do a good job of making sure that the research subjects or clinical trial participants are being protected. But anyways, we're gonna get into that. That's certainly a big topic, and it's a lot bigger than I can cover in this short video post. And we'll have like live discussions on UStream. Those would probably take like 20 to 30 minutes just to kind of barely scratch the surface, but go a little deeper than I will today. But let me just give you some facts that I read. Let's see, what is this? AMED News. They had a good article about it. It says, here's something that kind of stuck out at me. Fewer than 6 in 10 trial protocols, so less than 6 out of 10 studies in developing countries get reviewed by an ethics committee. That's staggering because the ones here in the United States, those ones, I mean, every single study has to have an IRB. And for those of you interested in learning what an IRB is, we've done tons of posts on that. So just check out, do a search on our blog, just put IRB. That's IRB. Only 1 in 10 Chinese trial protocols got an ethics review, according to an April 2008 article in the journal Trials. 4 in 5 of those protocols failed to discuss informed consent adequately. Another thing that kind of stuck at me was not even half. Okay, so in the United States, in Canada, and in some of the industrialized nations like in Europe and stuff, um, not even 50% of study volunteers complete a study that they participate in. And for the sites out there that claim to have high retention rates, yeah, you may have high retention rates for certain studies, but if you take an average of all the clinical trials being done in all the industrialized nations, the retention rate is less than 50%. So for those of you who are constantly putting on your site information assessment sheets to the sponsors, 90% and higher of your retention rates or completion rates. I mean, they're going to smell the BS because the figure is less than 50% of study volunteers in industrialized nations finish the trial. I mean, it just, people want to withdraw. People are free to withdraw whenever they want. We just did a topic on that. You can withdraw from a study at any time for any reason. So it makes sense that it's, completion rate in the United States is less than 50%. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. Now, completion rates in developing countries, by contrast, frequently approach 90%. This raises concerns about whether participants feel free to quit. So as you can see, there's a lot of issues in developing nations as far as clinical trials goes. And like I said, I'm not a guru on studies being done overseas. I've managed a lot of studies being done here in California, but none overseas. But we'll have people on, and they're going to talk about it, and we're going to ask them to kind of educate all of us. So you study participants here in the industrialized nations, you guys, we're pretty much here in the industrialized nations, we're pretty much setting the standards for how research should be done, and the standards have already been set. I mean, we've been following them for decades now. But in industrialized nations, they're just kind of learning how to do it. And yeah, there's a lot of research sites in developing nations that are doing a great job, but there's a lot that are apparently abusing the situation, and that's going to have to change. So we'll have our guest gurus comment on that. Just wanted to run this by you guys and let you know what's going on. This is a huge issue, and we're going to hear a lot more about this. So clinical trials being done in developing nations and some impoverished nations. A lot of ethical concerns, and we got to be careful. And the ones for those of you doing studies here in the United States, I mean, you guys have it good. We've had clear standards that are regulated for decades, and there's really not much to worry about. From the people that we've interviewed, they're all been U.S. subjects that have participated in clinical trials in the U.S. We haven't had too many issues. There's an exception here or there where people maybe were not allowed to withdraw whenever they wanted to, or maybe they weren't able to withdraw at the very moment they wanted to withdraw from. But those are minor exceptions, and it's looking like overseas, it's more than just a handful of people who are having issues. So definitely a lot more on this. But anyways, www.theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Thanks a lot.